Here are the 3 types of strong, intimidating personalities that will make you question everyone you've ever trusted or feared. 3 kinds of people who walk into a room and shift the entire temperature without saying a word. The moment you recognize which one you are or which one you're standing in front of, everything about how you see power, respect and danger will change. The first type is the man who takes what others wait for permission to have. You've met him. Maybe you've envied him. Maybe you've secretly hated him because he reminds you of everything you could have been if you hadn't asked for approval before acting. He moves like he's certain the world already belongs to him. When others pause to check the rules, he's already rewritten them. When others hesitate, he's already taken the seat they were staring at. There's something primitive in him, something that refuses to kneel before invisible masters. And that precisely is why he's feared. Because deep down, everyone knows they were once like him before they were trained not to be. Most men were born with this instinct, the hunger to move, to claim, to dominate the space they stand on. But from childhood, they are disciplined into politeness, civility, patience, virtues that are often nothing more than chains with decorative links. They are told to wait their turn, to share, to be kind. And while they practice patience, someone bolder takes what they were praying for. The first type doesn't wait for divine timing. He is the divine timing, the force through which fate expresses itself. Every institution, every hierarchy, every doctrine that tells you to wait for the right time is simply a mechanism to preserve someone else's advantage. The man who takes doesn't just break rules. He sees that most rules exist to keep the bold out of the kingdom built by cowards. He is not reckless. Don't mistake his movement for chaos. He is lucid. He knows exactly what fear sounds like in the minds of men. He knows when someone is about to fold. He can smell hesitation the way a wolf smells blood. And because of that, he acts when others deliberate. His strength is not blind aggression, it's perception followed by immediate execution. He doesn't talk about what he'll do. His speech is the act itself. The world remembers him not for his morality, but for his results. History worships those who seize first and justify later, because the masses only respect outcomes once they are irreversible. But society hates this man because he exposes its lie. The lie that fairness and obedience lead to greatness. The lie that you can follow and still lead. The lie that humility is a virtue rather than a tranquilizer. When this man walks into an office, people call him arrogant. When he makes a demand, they call him ruthless. When he succeeds, they call him lucky. Why? Because each of those words is an emotional defense against their own impotence. It's easier to vilify power than to admit that you lack it. Easier to preach patience than to act with conviction. The man who takes is the mirror no one wants to look into, because he reflects the cost of your hesitation. Observe any moment of history, and you will find this archetype at its center. The conqueror who didn't wait for diplomacy to be finalized. The entrepreneur who didn't ask for market validation. The lover who kissed before the other one spoke. His pattern is always the same: clarity, movement, inevitability. He sees opportunity as something perishable, a ripe fruit that rots if you hesitate. To him, hesitation is the sin of the mediocre. And what does he see when he looks at the average man? Someone begging for instructions. Someone rehearsing courage instead of expressing it. Someone convinced that waiting makes them wise, when in truth, it only makes them irrelevant. There's a difference between patience and paralysis, but most can no longer tell the two apart. They confuse cowardice for strategy, obedience for discipline, silence for depth. The man who takes doesn't seek validation from these corpses of caution. He understands that to act is to reveal who truly has the power. Action is the great equalizer. In a world where everyone debates, the one who moves becomes godlike. That's why people whisper his name. That's why authority secretly fears him. Because he plays by older rules, the ones written in instinct, not etiquette. He doesn't crave dominance for ego's sake. He craves it because nature itself crowns the decisive. And yet, this archetype is not immune to misunderstanding. To the weak, he appears dangerous. To the wise, he appears necessary. Civilization depends on such men to keep it alive. Builders, conquerors, leaders who refuse to let indecision become the new god. But to the herd, his confidence feels violent. They ask, who does he think he is? And he answers by existing. He doesn't need to argue his worth. The throne does not apologize for its height. His mere presence is proof of what others lacked. Permission from within. That's the secret. He doesn't seek permission because he already gave it to himself. The rest are still waiting for someone else to validate their right to move. This type of man is becoming rarer every year. Society has replaced conquest with consensus, strength with sensitivity, clarity with confusion. It tells young men to be nice, to fit in, to listen more than they speak. But the irony is, the world still bends to those who do the opposite. The boardroom, the battlefield, the bedroom, every sphere of life still rewards the decisive. You can meditate on your potential forever, but one act of courage from this man will erase 1,000 of your plans. You can strategize for years, but he will take what you're still planning to deserve. And when you finally gather the courage to act, he'll already be too far ahead for your outrage to matter. And so the weak invent morality to control him. They design systems, laws, and ideologies to limit his kind. They say, wait for permission, wait for proof, wait for safety. They call this civilization. He calls it domestication. The lion that waits for the zookeeper's whistle might live longer, but he will never taste blood again. That's what has happened to men. They have mistaken captivity for comfort. They have traded the freedom to act for the safety of being told what to do. And when someone walks among them who still remembers how to take, they label him monstrous. But what if the monster is simply the man who never forgot he was a predator? This is the tragedy and the beauty of the first archetype, the man who takes what others wait for permission to have. He lives in the same world as you, but experiences it differently. To him, time is not something to spend, it's something to conquer. He doesn't chase opportunities, he creates them by declaring them his. Every hesitation you make becomes his advantage. Every fear you entertain becomes his leverage. That's why you can't ignore him. He doesn't just intimidate you with strength, he exposes the weakness you've been concealing. You can recognize him before he speaks. The air shifts when he walks in. People can't explain it, but something about his presence demands awareness. It's not his looks, his wealth, or his status. It's something older, an aura of certainty that doesn't need validation. The man who takes what others wait for permission to have isn't merely bold, he's internally free. While most people move under invisible chains of what will they think, he operates from an internal decree. What he decides is real becomes real. That's what unnerves people. It's not that he's stronger, it's that he's ungoverned. You see, this man's mind operates on a principle so simple it terrifies the civilized. If I am capable of it, I am permitted to do it. His morality is pragmatic. His ethics are rooted in outcome, not opinion. He sees hesitation as the invention of the powerless, a disease spread by those who have never tested their own will. When he acts, he doesn't seek permission because he's already evaluated the consequences and accepted them. He doesn't fear judgment because he knows most judgment is just disguised envy. And while others are busy overthinking, he's already taken the first step that changes everything. His decisiveness isn't impulsive, it's logical. He understands that in a world ruled by perception, speed is intelligence. Most people fail not because they lack intelligence, but because they fear being misunderstood. They want to act, but they crave reassurance first. They ask, what if I fail? What if they don't approve? What if it costs me my reputation? The man who takes doesn't ask these questions. He's not heartless, he's simply realistic. He knows that progress is a transaction. You exchange comfort for control. Every empire was built by someone who stopped asking, am I allowed? And started saying, watch me. When others call him arrogant, it only confirms his accuracy, because arrogance, in the eyes of the fearful, is merely confidence without permission. Inside his mind, there's a constant calculation happening, not of morality, but of leverage. He doesn't move randomly, he moves with surgical precision. When he enters a negotiation, he's already mapped out the psychology of everyone in the room. He doesn't need to raise his voice, he raises the stakes. He knows that most people fold when confronted with certainty, so he plays calm, slow, deliberate. His weapon isn't dominance, it's inevitability. The more he speaks, the more others start believing him, not because his words are superior, but because his conviction infects their uncertainty. That's the true nature of charisma, the ability to make others doubt their own resistance. To understand him, you must confront a brutal truth. The reason you can't be like him is because you still want to be liked. You still hope to be seen as good, fair, balanced. But the man who takes knows that goodness without power is ornamental. It decorates your failure. He doesn't seek to be liked, he seeks to be obeyed, respected, remembered. He doesn't crave applause, because applause is just the sound people make after someone else has already won. He doesn't fantasize about validation. He treats it as a side effect of victory. This is what separates him from dreamers and thinkers. He acts as if the crown already belongs to him, and that confidence over time convinces even reality to agree. Every decision he makes carries weight because he's accepted what others deny. That power and morality rarely coexist comfortably. He knows that to change the world, you must first accept being hated by it. That's why he doesn't flinch at criticism. It's proof that he's bending the structure of comfort. His indifference is his armor. When others panic under scrutiny, he sharpens his composure. The more they attack his motives, the more he smiles, because the noise of opposition is the melody of relevance. The weak confuse disapproval with danger. The strong know that disapproval is simply confirmation of movement. Look closer at him in everyday life. The businessman who makes a ruthless decision and still sleeps soundly. The artist who creates something controversial and refuses to explain. The athlete who celebrates before the crowd approves. These are not random acts of arrogance. They are demonstrations of internal authority. He lives as if every choice is law, and in a sense it is. Because once you stop needing validation, the world becomes your court, and every hesitation from others becomes a confession of their obedience to you. That's why people follow him even when they hate him. He embodies what they secretly wish they had the courage to be. But don't romanticize him. This man pays a price for his freedom. His victories isolate him. His decisiveness intimidates allies as much as enemies. He walks alone more often than not, because the herd instinctively distrusts those who move without it. There's a loneliness to power that no one talks about. The silence that follows when you no longer need to ask anyone what to do. Most can't survive that silence. They crawl back to belonging. But he thrives in it. Solitude sharpens him. He knows that greatness has always been a solitary path, paved with the stones thrown by those who chose comfort. He would rather walk alone in power than surrounded in weakness. When he looks at the world, he sees two kinds of people, those who need permission to exist and those who give it to themselves. He watches the first group seek approval for every move, clinging to rules, customs, and social etiquette. Then he sees the second group, his kind, moving quietly, taking what they need, shaping reality by sheer conviction. It's not greed, it's sovereignty. He doesn't want everything. He just wants to ensure that what's his cannot be taken by those who hesitate. And when the hesitant finally understand that, it's already too late. The decisive have already built their empires on the ruins of the indecisive. Understand this: you can't learn to be like him by reading about him. You must unlearn everything that made you harmless. You must stop waiting for applause, stop seeking safety, stop delaying action in the name of timing. You must act first and refine later. You must burn the script of obedience that was handed to you by weaker men. Because power does not emerge from waiting, it emerges from doing. That's why the man who takes is both hated and secretly worshipped. He reminds the world of what it gave up: the right to be dangerous, to move freely, to act without asking. And if you thought this type was unsettling, the man who acts while others wait, you haven't yet met the second archetype. Because there exists a kind of power far colder than decisiveness. The kind that doesn't just act faster, it sees deeper. The next archetype doesn't conquer by movement, but by mind. He doesn't intimidate you through force, but through awareness. And when he looks at you, it feels as if your soul is under interrogation. He sits across from you, silent, observant, patient, but the silence is not empty. It's diagnostic. The second archetype, the person who sees your manipulation before you finish the sentence, does not dominate by action but by perception. He is not interested in what you say. He studies why you said it. Every gesture, every pause, every inflection is a data point. When you speak to him, it feels as if your soul is under a microscope. And within moments, he knows exactly what you're hiding, what you fear, what you want him to believe. You can't lie to him, not because he's magical, but because he's learned how fragile human deception truly is. He understands that most people don't communicate, they advertise. Every opinion is a performance, every apology a strategy, every compliment a trade. He doesn't hear words, he hears currency being exchanged. And because of that, he navigates through people as if reading an open ledger. While others get manipulated through emotion, he dissects emotion as an instrument of control. When someone flatters him, he doesn't blush, he measures the motive. When someone threatens him, He doesn't react. He calculates the insecurity behind the aggression. This is not cynicism, it's literacy. He has learned to read the subtext of power in every human interaction, and it makes him immune to most forms of social manipulation. This type of person often appears quiet, restrained, or cold. That's not because they lack empathy. It's because they've seen too much of how empathy is exploited. They know that pity is a weapon, that tears can buy obedience, and that kindness, when used strategically, can disarm the suspicious. So they don't rush to comfort, don't rush to react. They observe first. Their power lies in seeing the game unfold while others are still emotionally reacting to it. This awareness creates distance, and that distance becomes authority. The moment you realize they're not emotionally involved, you start losing control, because control only works on those who can be provoked. In conversation, this archetype is lethal. They don't interrupt, they let you reveal yourself. Their silence feels like pressure, because you sense they're not believing your performance. You start over-explaining, justifying, confessing indirectly. They create this effect intentionally. They know the most dangerous interrogation isn't done with questions, it's done with quiet attention. People cannot stand being unread, so they fill the silence with self-exposure. That's how this archetype dominates without raising a voice. They weaponize curiosity. You crave their approval, yet you fear their insight. And once they have you in that dual state, wanting to be seen but terrified of being understood, they control the entire psychological battlefield. This power of perception is not something they were born with. It's a result of betrayal, humiliation, observation. Once, they were naive too. Once, they believed words meant what they appeared to mean. But every lie, every manipulation, every performance they endured carved a sharper instrument inside their mind. They began to notice patterns, how people justify cruelty with morality, how honesty is used as bait, how even love can be transactional. And over time, something inside them hardened, not their heart but their vision. They learned that true understanding requires detachment. To see people clearly, you must stop needing them to be good. That's what makes them intimidating. You can't manipulate someone who has no emotional blind spots. You can't control someone who already expects deceit. And you can't seduce someone who's already detached from the outcome. When they speak, they rarely say much, but every word lands with precision. They understand human weakness too well to waste it. Their intelligence is not academic, it's psychological. They move through conversations like chess players, positioning insights like pawns, drawing out truths without ever revealing their hand. And the more you try to understand them, the more you realize that you're the one being studied. People who encounter this archetype often describe the same sensation, a kind of mental exposure. It's as if he knows what you're about to say before you say it. He completes your sentences not verbally but emotionally. He sees the motive behind your kindness, the desperation behind your logic, the envy behind your praise. You feel naked around him, and that vulnerability makes you defensive. But the more defensive you become, the more data you give away. That's the genius of his design. His intelligence provokes honesty from others. They reveal themselves just to prove they're not hiding anything, and by the time they realize he already knew, it's too late. This is why he's both respected and feared. In social hierarchies, perception is power. The one who understands the motives of others can control the flow of loyalty and betrayal. This archetype doesn't need to manipulate directly. He simply arranges people's illusions so that they destroy themselves. He can dismantle alliances without confrontation, simply by planting awareness. Once he exposes one person's secret motive to another, trust collapses naturally. He doesn't attack, he reveals. And revelation is often more destructive than violence. The second archetype teaches a harsh truth. To see reality clearly, you must let go of your emotional need for it to be comforting. He doesn't crave comfort, he craves accuracy. That's what separates him from the sentimental masses. Where others see intentions, he sees results. Where others justify behavior, he studies consequence. He's not interested in being good, he's interested in being right about the human condition. And that rightness grants him a quiet form of dominion. When he walks through a room, people lower their voices, not because he demands it, but because his gaze feels like an X-ray. He doesn't intimidate through aggression, but through precision. The more you try to hide, the more he seems to see. What makes him so unnerving is that he doesn't play by emotional rules. You can't guilt him, you can't flatter him, you can't rush him. He doesn't need your approval, so he's unresponsive to your manipulation. And that's when people begin to fear him, not because he's cruel, but because he's incorruptible. You can predict the reactions of everyone else but not his. His restraint is power. His silence is pressure. His detachment is strategy. You may think you're leading the conversation, but he's leading the outcome. And by the end, you find yourself saying things you never meant to share, making concessions you thought you'd never make. That's the invisible influence of perception, control without command. If the first archetype conquers through action, this one conquers through awareness. He doesn't need to move fast because he moves deep. While others race to win, he studies the battlefield until he owns it in his mind. That's why his victories feel inevitable, because by the time you act, he's already 3 moves ahead. He's not predicting you through magic, he's predicting you through pattern. Human nature is repetitive, and he's been paying attention longer than you've been performing. And yet, there is a loneliness in his understanding. When you see everyone's motives too clearly, it's hard to connect sincerely. The cost of seeing the truth is losing the comfort of illusion. He knows this. That's why he rarely opens up. To share his perception would only alienate him further. So he wears calmness like armor, not arrogance. Beneath it lies a man who no longer expects honesty, only patterns. But what happens when such a mind evolves beyond observation into mastery? When the one who sees no longer just perceives but begins to reshape the behavior of others through his insight. Once perception becomes power, the intellectual predator emerges. He no longer merely observes, he manipulates reality through the awareness he has cultivated. The person who sees your manipulation before you finish the sentence does not waste his insight on revelation alone, he refines it into precision strikes. He does not need to shout, threaten, or dominate physically. His arena is the human psyche, and his weapon is anticipation. Every move you make is already accounted for, every emotional appeal already mapped. He sees the invisible strings you're trying to pull, and with one subtle shift, he makes you tie them around your own neck. What makes this archetype so dangerous is not what he knows, but how he uses it. He understands that the majority of human interaction is driven by unconscious motive. People speak to be liked, act to be seen, and conform to be safe. He studies these motives like a hunter studies the wind. When he manipulates, it's seamless, almost poetic. You never feel the push, you simply drift toward the outcome he intended, believing it was your own idea. That's the mark of a true strategist, not visible control, but invisible influence. The greatest manipulators never appear to be in control. They appear to be patient, understanding, almost selfless. But beneath that calm exterior lies a mind that calculates every ripple of effect with surgical accuracy. He does not seek chaos, he engineers predictability. His mastery lies in patterns. Once he understands yours, you become predictable. Once you're predictable, you're controllable. His conversations are constructed like traps, carefully worded, emotionally timed, psychologically baited. You think you're opening up out of trust, but he's leading you there through calculated empathy. He uses understanding as leverage. To most, empathy is connection. To him, it's navigation. The moment you expose what you fear, he knows what you'll defend. The moment you show what you love, he knows what can be used to move you. This is not cruelty, it's design. He understands that in human affairs, sincerity is currency, and he spends it wisely. What makes him lethal is his patience. Unlike the impulsive, the manipulator waits. He lets others reveal themselves fully, lets their desires ripen into dependency. Then, when the timing aligns, he gives them exactly what they crave, not out of generosity but precision. People trust him because he mirrors them. He becomes what they need most: validation, authority, compassion, rebellion, whatever serves the endgame. His face changes according to the room, but his purpose never does. And when he finally acts, it feels less like betrayal and more like inevitability. The victim often blames themselves, saying, "I should have seen it." That's the perfection of his craft. He makes you feel responsible for your own manipulation. You'll find him in politics, business, art, relationships, anywhere control must be disguised as charm. His mastery of perception allows him to move between alliances without ever appearing unfaithful. To the ambitious, he's a mentor. To the emotional, he's a savior. To the naive, he's a miracle. But to those who know the game, He's an adversary to respect and fear. Because he doesn't play for validation, he plays for positioning. Every word, every compliment, every silence is an investment. He trades in loyalty the way merchants trade in gold. He gives it sparingly, receives it easily, and never spends more than he gains. To understand how he thinks, imagine a chessboard where every piece represents a human weakness: envy, pride, fear, desire. He moves those pieces without touching them. He whispers an idea here, plants a doubt there, and watches as the board rearranges itself. The beauty of his manipulation is that it doesn't require confrontation. He knows confrontation breeds resistance, and resistance breeds awareness. So he sidesteps resistance entirely. He makes you want the outcome he's already chosen. By the time you realize what he's done, you're too invested to turn back. But his intelligence is not demonic, it's disciplined. He doesn't waste it on petty victories. He knows manipulation without purpose is self-destruction. He uses it to construct systems, to move people into alignment with his vision. That's why he's not easily hated. People sense something calculated about him, but they also sense direction. His power doesn't feel like exploitation, it feels like destiny. He gives structure to chaos, control to confusion, and meaning to ambition. And that's why even his enemies orbit him. They resent his insight but depend on his clarity. In every group, every institution, every relationship, someone like him exists. The silent architect behind decisions everyone thinks were mutual. His presence is intoxicating because it provides the illusion of being understood. Most people live unseen. This archetype makes them feel visible. That's how he gains power. To be seen is to be vulnerable. And when you trust someone who understands you deeply, you surrender control willingly. That's why his manipulation rarely feels malicious. It feels intimate. But intimacy in his hands is a strategic weapon. He listens, remembers, reflects, and when the time comes, redirects. Not violently, effortlessly. He doesn't need to overpower your will. He simply replaces it with a version of his own that feels like yours. And yet, like every form of mastery, this comes with a cost. The deeper his perception grows, the harder it becomes for him to experience genuine connection. When you see through everyone, you can't lose yourself in anyone. His relationships become strategic alignments, his friendships conditional trust pacts, his love a form of study. It's not that he lacks heart, it's that his heart no longer believes in innocence. He's tasted too much of human duplicity to pretend otherwise. Even when he loves, he analyzes. Even when he trusts, he verifies. He doesn't betray easily, but when he does, it's absolute, surgical, final, emotionless. Because for him, betrayal isn't sin, it's a rebalancing of power. This archetype reveals one of Machiavelli's oldest truths. Those who understand the motives of others will always rule those who don't understand their own. To see clearly is to control quietly. The world worships confidence, but it's perception that governs it. The strongest man in the room is rarely the loudest. It's the one who already knows what everyone else is thinking. If you thought the first archetype, the man who takes what others wait for permission to have, was dangerous, and if this second archetype, the one who sees through manipulation before it's even spoken, was unsettling, then prepare yourself, because the third type is not driven by power at all. He cannot be baited, bribed, or broken. He holds something even more terrifying than dominance: indifference. There is a kind of strength that doesn't roar, doesn't scheme, and doesn't chase. It simply stands unmoved. The third archetype, the person who genuinely doesn't need you, is not above others through dominance or deception, but through detachment. They hold no one hostage with their affection, and no one can hold them hostage with approval. Their power begins where dependency ends. You can't manipulate them because they don't fear loss. You can't control them because they've already lived without what you're offering. And you can't impress them because they've seen how temporary everything really is. When you meet them, you sense it instantly, the stillness in their energy, the absence of need. While others radiate hunger, this person radiates completion. It's unsettling because the entire world is addicted to wanting. The social order depends on desire for love, for recognition, for status. This archetype moves outside that economy. Their calm feels alien, even arrogant, because it exposes how desperate everyone else is. In a society where attention is currency, the one who doesn't need attention becomes priceless. That's why they're feared. You can't buy, seduce, or threaten someone who's already at peace with walking away. They didn't reach this detachment by being cold. In fact, they likely came from the opposite extreme, someone who cared too much, gave too much, and got burned enough times to lose the illusion that attachment equals safety. They've been through dependency and out the other side. They've seen how affection can be weaponized, how promises can be leveraged, how even love can become a form of control. And in that realization, they found freedom. They stopped chasing closure, approval, revenge. They simply stopped needing the world to behave according to their expectations. And that renunciation made them untouchable. To understand their strength, you must see how most people live. The average person needs validation to exist. They measure their worth by response, by the text that gets sent back, the compliment that confirms, the follower that appears. They live in constant feedback loops of emotional confirmation. Remove that and they collapse. But the person who doesn't need you has transcended that addiction. Their self-image doesn't require witnesses. Their peace isn't negotiable. They don't post to be seen or speak to be approved. They act, then disappear, content in knowing they moved with intention. You can praise them, insult them, abandon them. It doesn't touch their core. That kind of stillness terrifies those who depend on noise to feel alive. You might mistake their calm for indifference, but it's deeper than that. Indifference is numbness. This is sovereignty. It's not that they don't feel, it's that their emotions no longer dictate their actions. They can love intensely without clinging, give generously without expectation, walk away without bitterness. That balance is incomprehensible to most because most people equate love with control. The idea of loving someone and still being able to leave them confuses the codependent mind. But this archetype knows that love without freedom isn't love, it's ownership. They refuse to be owned, and they refuse to own. That's why they appear so calm. They have nothing to lose that would break them. When they enter a room, they don't seek to impress or dominate. They simply are. And that authenticity disrupts the social hierarchy. You can't outshine someone who doesn't care to compete. You can't intimidate someone who has nothing to prove. They operate from inner abundance. They don't bargain for respect. They embody it. Even their silence carries gravity because it's not a tactic, it's self-sufficiency made visible. They don't chase validation, yet they receive it endlessly, because paradoxically, the world bends toward those who need nothing from it. Their independence often gets mistaken for loneliness, but they are rarely lonely. Solitude is not their punishment, it's their habitat. They treat silence like oxygen. In solitude, they think clearly, move deliberately, and return stronger. They don't need crowds to feel significant. They don't need noise to drown out insecurity. The absence of need creates a presence of clarity, and clarity is magnetic. People are drawn to them, hoping to absorb their calm, to decode their mystery. But the secret isn't mystery, it's mastery over self. They've tamed the emotional animal that keeps most people enslaved to validation. To them, detachment isn't withdrawal from life, it's engagement without addiction. They enjoy, they connect, they create, but never at the expense of their autonomy. If someone leaves, they don't chase. If opportunity fades, they don't despair. They don't define themselves by what remains or what's lost. They define themselves by how little can shake their peace. And that peace makes them profoundly intimidating, because everyone senses it. This person cannot be bent. You can argue, plead, insult, praise. It doesn't move them off center. They remain still, and in that stillness, your chaos becomes visible. This archetype has no interest in proving strength. They simply live in a way that reveals weakness in others. When someone tries to provoke them, they don't react, they observe. The louder you become, the more foolish you appear. When someone tries to manipulate them, they see it instantly, not with judgment, but with quiet understanding. You can't guilt them. They forgive faster than you can weaponize remorse. You can't control them. They walk away mid-sentence if the energy turns false. They don't need closure because they are closure. When they end something, it stays ended, not out of pride, but peace. They don't reopen doors that life has already closed. Their emotional detachment gives them a supernatural kind of timing. They know when to enter, when to exit, when to stay silent. They never force momentum. They move like tides, consistent, deliberate, inevitable. That's why they always appear to win, even when they lose. You can take their job, their lover, their reputation, but you can't take their composure. And composure is the purest form of power. The world chases control, they are control. And yet, what makes this archetype most fascinating is their lack of hostility. They don't preach detachment as rebellion, they embody it as grace. Their indifference is not bitterness, it's transcendence. They've outgrown the game without needing to destroy it. They look at those still chasing approval with compassion, not contempt. They know what that prison feels like. They've simply chosen freedom, and freedom, once tasted, makes every form of emotional dependence unbearable. But there is one final evolution of this state, when detachment turns into influence. When the one who needs nothing begins to affect those who need everything. When others start reorganizing their behavior just to earn a reaction from the person who refuses to react. That's when stillness becomes control and silence becomes dominance. When detachment matures into mastery, the person who genuinely doesn't need you becomes something extraordinary, a mirror that reveals the hidden desperation in everyone else. Their stillness no longer serves just as personal armor. It becomes a gravitational field. People orbit them without understanding why. The more indifferent they seem, the more others want their attention. The more silent they remain, the more others speak to fill the void. The one who has nothing to prove makes everyone else desperate to prove something. That is the final evolution of strength, when your lack of need becomes the invisible force that governs those who still crave validation. At this stage, they don't seek control. Control seeks them. Influence flows toward them because people subconsciously trust those who are unmoved by flattery or fear. In a world addicted to reaction, the person who doesn't react becomes the standard of power. They don't dominate conversations, they redefine their tone. They don't argue, they let others collapse under the weight of their own noise. Even their silence carries verdicts. Their refusal to respond becomes its own form of punishment, and their attention becomes a reward so rare that people fight for it. Without lifting a finger, they hold command over those who mistake attention for oxygen. The irony is that they never intended to rule. Their authority emerged naturally as a consequence of self-possession. You can't fake this kind of strength. It isn't aesthetic, it's energetic. It's the quiet that comes from knowing nothing external can add or subtract from who you are. They walk through life without performing, and that authenticity dismantles the social theater around them. Every pretender feels exposed in their presence. Every manipulator feels predictable. Every narcissist feels powerless, because manipulation requires response, and they provide none. They don't mirror weakness, they dissolve it. This is what society doesn't understand. The most commanding people are not the loudest. They are the least affected. You can train yourself to speak well, dress well, perform well. But if you still flinch when ignored, you're not free. The person who genuinely doesn't need you has transcended that threshold. Their self-worth doesn't fluctuate with attention. Their peace doesn't tremble under scrutiny. They've killed the need to be seen, and in doing so, they've become unforgettable. This paradox is eternal. The one who no longer seeks power becomes the only one qualified to hold it. You can see this archetype in the rare few who live without pretense. They don't broadcast their lives for approval. They don't seek applause for their virtues. They move through success and failure with the same quiet grace. When insulted, they don't retaliate. When praised, they don't inflate. They've mastered the art of neutrality, not apathy, but sovereignty over emotion. That's what makes them untouchable. Emotional neutrality is the final frontier of strength, because it means your peace is not at the mercy of the world's instability. They have become the eye of the storm, calm, centered, unshaken, while chaos swirls around them trying to provoke a reaction that will never come. And people will try. They will poke, provoke, tempt, and seduce, hoping to find the crack where attention leaks out. But this archetype has already made peace with loss, rejection, and misunderstanding. You can't shame them, they've already confessed to themselves. You can't isolate them, they enjoy solitude. You can't cancel them, they don't exist to be approved. That is why they are feared. They cannot be destroyed by the weapons that destroy ordinary people. They don't live in the same psychological system as the rest of the world. You're trying to fight someone who's already detached from the battlefield. The brilliance of their presence lies in what it does to others. When people encounter them, they start editing themselves. They speak more carefully, behave more consciously, question their own motives. The detached person doesn't correct anyone, They simply embody an energy so stable that instability exposes itself in contrast. The insecure start confessing, the manipulative start over-explaining, the loud start doubting. Without ever intending to, this person becomes a mirror of truth. Their mere existence reorganizes the dynamics around them. It's not sorcery, it's alignment. When you are free from need, you stop distorting reality. And when you stop distorting reality, you become reality's anchor. What makes them so rare is that their detachment isn't defensive, it's disciplined. They don't avoid love, they love without dependency. They don't avoid ambition, they pursue it without obsession. They don't avoid people, they simply don't collapse into them. Every action they take arises from choice, not compulsion. And that's what real freedom is, the ability to act without being pulled by invisible strings of fear or desire. They move when it feels right, not when the world demands motion. And that timing, born from intuition, not impulse, is what makes their influence permanent. When the world finally sees them, it labels them mysterious, intimidating, unapproachable. But those are just projections from people who can't understand serenity that doesn't need stimulation. The truth is simpler. They've stopped performing the dance of emotional survival. They live from an inner abundance that requires nothing. Every interaction is optional. Every relationship is chosen, not clung to. Every victory is graceful, every loss accepted. That's why they seem invincible, because there's nothing left to defend. This is the final revelation of strength. Power that comes not from taking, not from seeing, but from being. The man who takes what others wait for permission to have rules through action. The one who sees your manipulation before you finish the sentence rules through perception. But the one who genuinely doesn't need you, he rules through stillness. He doesn't conquer the world reorganizes itself around him. He is proof that the ultimate dominance is not control but composure. So, ask yourself honestly, which one are you? The taker who moves first, the seer who perceives deeper, or the sovereign who needs nothing at all? Because once you find yourself in this hierarchy, you'll understand what Machiavelli always knew. Power is not what you show the world. Power is what the world cannot take from you. If you've made it this far, it's because a part of you already knows this truth. Intimidation isn't a tactic, it's a presence. It's the unspoken dominance that weak men feel before words are even exchanged. The strong don't announce themselves, they are simply felt. Now tell me in the comments, which type are you? The silent strategist, the cold observer, or the calculating predator? If this message touched you, if it made sense, write in the comments, I know my presence. Let's see how many here are truly ready to embody quiet power. And don't forget, keep watching the next video, it's important. Much more than you imagine. See you there.